And welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. We are back. We are building the board. We are here to build a draft board for the Chicago Bears, and we are so excited to do it for you guys. We have all of our scouts in this episode. Come on, give a little bit of background about themselves, give a little bit of background about their time as Bears fans, their favorite draft picks of all time, who their guy in the draft was last year, and more important than anything, some of the discussion that I found the most fun to talk about was the scouting process, right? We talk with each scout about what their favorite position to scout is and what they specifically look for in that position. So make sure to stick around. We got a bit longer of an episode today, but we talk with each of those scouts and get that insight. I think we had some great conversations. So let's jump right into it. All right. And we are back with another one of our scouts, Mr. Ron Luce of Bears on Tap fame, of Four Feathers fame, of Cubs on Tap fame. He's a famous man. Ron, how are you doing today?
Oh, Q, I'm well. As we record this, we just got done talking to a great guest over at our regular programming here as a part of Bears on Tap. But I'm doing well, man. I'm excited. I'm excited to be a part of the Building the Board project, and excited to get into this little intro with you that we get to share a little bit about all the great scouts putting in a lot of great work here.
Yeah, so we have a preset questions here. We'll ask all of them. We might get into a rabbit hole here or there on the way. But Ron, first of all, why don't you give the people who might not already know a little background info about yourself and where to find you and your work?
Yeah, if anybody's a religious follower of anything on Tap Sportsnet, you've seen my face probably at a nauseating amount. I apologize for that in complete advance. But Cubs on Tap, Four Feathers Pod, Bears on Tap, as you mentioned, Q. I've done a little bit of everything and anything over the course of time. In addition to that, I do broadcasting, play-by-play voice, color commentary as well. Go Wheelers. Their season starts very, very soon in alignment with the UFL season, so super excited about that. And of course, On Tap Sportsnet is where you can find most of my work, if not all of my work. And at Loose on Tap on the socials is the best place to find me. But Q, yeah, I'm all over the place, man. And again, I enjoyed this project maybe the most because it's such a small part of the year and it's different. It's always a new class, right? You're not rehashing the same thing. And even though every season's different, there's always elements I feel like from season to season that are consistent. Every draft class is completely different. And I think that's what makes this so much fun.
Yeah. And so one thing that I got to mention as well, because I think it gives certain credibilities. You did play a little offensive line in college. So
I did.
Yeah, I think that's worth mentioning for background as far as your ability to assess offensive linemen, defensive linemen, running backs, and offenses in general.
Yes, I did play, albeit I maybe wasn't the greatest player in the collegiate level, but I did play. I feel like I have a pretty good understanding of the game, but there's a lot of things that I will happily admit that I don't know as well as I would probably like to, and those are things I think over the coming years in my personal life that I'm hoping to change a little bit here. But yeah, got some O-line experience, O-line background, and that I hope that it lends a little bit of credibility in some of the things I have to say.
Now, let's get into some of the meat and potatoes here of what's your favorite position to scout and why?
You know, Q, I think a lot of people would expect the answer to be offensive line, and don't get me wrong, love offensive line grading, especially with you, my friend. A big shout out to our film room episodes from this year. I look forward to doing those next year with you again as well. Maybe even with some of the guys that the Bears might be bringing in either free agency or via the draft. So I think O-line is always a position I've enjoyed, but I really must admit, I really enjoy scouting running backs. And I think a lot of that reasoning is because even though I wasn't a running back myself, I understand what is asked of running backs at the position based on my experience of inside run drills with them in college and watching it as a kind of a part-time assistant. You know, I just do it for the love of being around it, coach. And, you know, it's such an interesting position because you hear so many people are like, well, running back and linebacker are the hardest positions to grade. And it's like, yeah, maybe they're the hardest positions to grade with like numbers and stats, but having a good feel for the game you can kind of figure out what they're doing or what they're being asked to do. And I think running back, admittedly, is a lot easier than a linebacker or DBs because there's coverages that you have to be able to understand and diagnose. And sometimes it's not that simple, right? I mean, it's the NFL and even some of these top college programs, they do a great job disguising coverage a lot of times. So it's not that simple to be like, oh, well, he was out of position. Well, how do we know? Running back's a little different, right? It's pretty simple. It's either you're going out for a pass or you're asked to help block, which, as we diagnosed at nauseum this year on the film room shows, is sometimes makes sense and sometimes it doesn't make sense. And sometimes guys will miss an assignment. But at the end of the day, it's being able to understand kind of run concepts and what running backs are coached to do. And once you got that feel for it, you can kind of develop from there and understand what a running back is besides just the highlight plays that they make on a weekly basis. So I think running back, honestly, Q, might be one of my favorite positions. O-line an honorable mention, and maybe tight end an honorable mention as well.
Now, I have a few questions off of that, but before we get to that, I want to give you the chance to answer our next known question because I don't want to trample on the potential answer. So, what is one non-negotiable trait for you at the running back position when you're watching it? Something that you need to see, or maybe the first thing you're looking for?
I think for me, the first thing I'm looking for that's a non-negotiable is running back vision. To me, vision is, it doesn't matter how good of an athlete you are, if you can't find the hole or you don't understand how to set yourself up for success as a running back, that's a non-negotiable for me. I think that was something that struggled a lot with this year with like a guy like DeAndre Swift. Incredible talent, obviously an incredible weapon in the passing game as a running back out of the backfield. Has the big explosive runs when they're designed and set up perfectly. But it's the general inside zone or the general outside zone and watching him try to set up his blocks, and it's not quite there. And for me, that's something that I really value in a running back, because if you have good vision as a running back, like all these guys are uber talented. You have to be to play running back. If you have that good vision, to me, that's what separates a lot of the guys that become busts in the NFL versus guys who have at least respectable careers at the next level.
Now, is there a way to kind of look at, it's like you're talking about vision, right? And setting up blocks and waiting for stuff to open up. How do you balance the difference between patient, too patient, and impatient?
That's a good question, because I think it's kind of a loaded question in the sense of, you look at a guy historically, right, like Le'Veon Bell. Like, people would be like, well, he's too patient. Yeah, but he was too patient to the point where he was really good at it. Like, that was a skill for him. A lot of guys don't have that. I think it's just understanding the cadence of a play. And what I mean by that, I don't literally mean going under center and green 48 set hike. I mean literally just the flow and the ebb of the play, right? You kind of know internally in your clock, if it's like outside zone, for example, it's usually like all right, 1,000, 1,000, and then like you kind of need to start making a decision. Whether you're going to cut it back, whether you're just going to keep going with it to the sideline, however you're going to approach that. So I think if you have that kind of mental understanding of it and understand the timing of the play, that's where I kind of factor that into, okay, this guy's uber patient because he can wait that maybe 3/4 of a second to let something open and then take it, versus a guy who's maybe just running immediately to the sideline. It's like, you haven't even looked at any of your cutback lanes. So I think, again, a lot of it is just a play-to-play kind of basis. What's the defense lining up? What's the situation as well, right? Sometimes it might just be, hey, we need a quick 5 yards. Just get to the sideline. I don't care. Especially late in a game, you want to conserve timeouts, whatever. So understanding that context is important too. But I think as long as you can kind of feel the cadence of the play developing, you can kind of start to gauge if a guy is too patient versus completely impatient, or somewhere beautifully in between.
Now, something that goes hand in hand with what you're talking about is, right, understanding the play, right? And if it's power, you can tell that pretty quickly. If it's a GT pole, you can tell that pretty quickly. But
right.
Even outside zone or wide zone, you can see it pretty evidently. When you're talking about inside zone or duo, how do you recognize the difference? And what's the difference for the running back between those two plays?
So I think the key is, Q, and this is something you and I talked a lot about as well. You actually do have to understand what the offensive line is being asked to do. and understand that technique. And I think that's a huge piece of being able to grade running backs is what's the O-line being asked to do in these situations? Because you can typically see with an inside zone, oh, okay, they're working stacks here. You can see somebody's coming off. I think in a way, when you're grading a running back, sometimes you have to watch the play twice and see what the O-line's doing. And I caught myself doing that very recently with Kyle Menunge out of Rutgers. I was so confused by what the line was doing that at least it allowed me to kind of step back and grade what he was doing and what he was being asked to do on the play. And in a lot of cases, like just as an example here on inside zone, he's asked to run the hash, which is pretty standard protocol for most running backs, run the hash. But a lot of times he's trying to just bounce it back because they're not able to get movement. And so, like, I think being able to understand and identify what inside zone is on the offensive line versus duo, because obviously duo is just big bulldozer, go forward and move guy. Like that's essentially what duo is at its core versus inside zone. It's, you can kind of start to see how they set up. Okay, this is their stack. This was their stack. We're letting the end guy go. You can start to feel that out a little bit more. So to me, maybe that's part of the reason why I enjoy scouting running back so much is because when you can understand what the offensive line's being able to do, asked to do, you can then understand what the running back's being asked to do in that situation as well.
Yeah, and so because with inside zone, right, there's essentially 3 reads. I mean, there's as many reads as there are run lanes, but like
Sure.
there's you can bang it forward, you can bend it outside, or you can bounce it back, right? But with duo, you don't really have that, right? It's just more get vertical.
Yeah, with duo, it's definitely get vertical and just have a head of steam. It's really what it is, right? It's power run. We'll take what we can get. Zone is almost in a sense of like you're trying to dissect the defense because the aiming point for the running back is going to more often than not be the hash. And then it's going to be like you said, right? Hey, is there anything front side? No. Okay. You can stay the hash because at the core of most run plays, Q, the hash is where things should open up if it's run properly and everything flows the way you would expect it to. And then to your point, right? Backside. Duo, yeah, it's just head down, get forward, and then maybe you see a cut lane and you can take it. But I think in duo, it's more of, I call it the Y cut. It's you're either running off the center's right cheek or his left cheek. And then it's, your Y cut's probably off the guard at that point in duo more often than not. So it's just, I think, more simplistic for the running back because it is truly just get forward, get vertical, and get what you can. Where in terms of zone, both inside and outside zone, it's letting plays develop. It's allowing your linemen to be athletes and then being able to kind of diagnose a hole and take it and then hit it with a head of steam.
And that gets back to the initial question of patient, impatient, too patient of, if you think you're watching a guy run duo, but he's actually running inside zone, you might be going, this guy, what's he waiting for?
No
but if you
patience
think
at all,
you think he's running inside zone and he's running duo, you're like, why is this guy so impatient? Like, so that was kind of the structure I was going for with those questions.
Sure. Yeah, and great points. And again, like, and I think this has so much to do with all positions, right? It's what is this player being asked to do on the play? Because it might not look like a great rep, but that also might not be their responsibility either. So, that's, I think, what the beauty of scouting is. It's an imperfect science because we don't have every single little detail. In some elements you do, right? If you have, this was this run play on this, forward look and this, that, and the other, when you don't necessarily kind of understand what's going on, it is a lot of guessing sometimes. And then I think sometimes players are unfairly graded in a sense because of something that wasn't necessarily their responsibility or because there was a lack of understanding of what the responsibility was on the play. So to me, that is a very key part, especially at the running back position, is just understanding what is the play in general, because that will at least give you a kind of a 1, 2, 3 option of what the running back would be asked to do in that scenario.
Yeah. Now, moving on, who was one of your guys from last year's draft class?
I sat on here with you, Q, when we did the running back episode, and I told you I like 2 guys, Braylon Allen and Bucky Irving. And Bucky Irving panned out. Now, obviously, situations certainly helped going to Tampa. Everybody, was talking, especially if you're a big fantasy player, and it's something that I tend to bring into, the building the board, because for me, it's good for my dynasty leagues to understand who these rookies are coming in. But with Bucky Irving, it was also a great situation he went to in Tampa, because Rachaad White was a very inefficient runner. He was probably going to be given opportunity. He was used a ton in the pass game, and we know that Tampa likes to use their running backs. We saw that implemented then with Dave Canales moving on to Carolina this year, and what Chuba Hubbard did in really what I would consider his breakout season as a tailback in the NFL. So I think for me, like, those were my guys last year. There wasn't a ton of, I saw the explosiveness and I understood what there was there with Brooks, but I kind of stayed away from watching a lot of Brooks film. And then I let myself get trapped into the Jalen Wright hype, even though I didn't see it on film. And, I felt the same way about Audric Estime, and there was a lot of guys I wasn't super high on, but Bucky, for me, his film was fun. And Braylon Allen's also fun because, like I told you on that episode, Braylon Allen was like one of the best pass blocking backs that was coming out of that draft last year. If not the best, and maybe in the last couple of years too. He just knew what to do, could square guys up. Playing at Wisconsin certainly helped. But those were my two guys. And, Q, it's nice when you see them go out there and they do something as rookies, especially in Bucky's case. I mean, being a 1,100-yard plus rusher as a rookie, you feel pretty good about your eye for the position when most people had him far down the board, because a lot of people fell out of love for him for whatever reason at the end of the day.
Yeah, Bucky was such a frustrating eval because of that, like because of the athletic testing, right? And it's like I almost feel like with running back, sometimes I want to throw the athletic testing out, because it's like, sure, the athletic testing wasn't great, but you know what? No one could tackle that guy.
Mm-mm.
As simple as that sometimes.
You know who Bucky reminded me of? And I can't recall if it was something I said, but it was something that I always kept in the back of my head. He reminded me a lot of Alvin Kamara in that way. Of just like, he kind of just gumbeat off of people, right? And I think you see a little bit of that with like how Jahmyr Gibbs runs, and it's just that Gumby feel, right? These guys hit the hole and they feel that contact, and it's not, oh, I tense, right? It's like a car crash. Oh, you tense up and you get hit and you're going to hit the ground because your body's tense. These guys are just Gumby off them, and then they just keep going.
Yeah.
And that's something you can't measure, right? Like, you can't measure a guy's ability to break tackles. It's just something you have to see on film. And again, this is why, in my opinion, Q, I think the combine is sometimes too overhyped. Yes, you need to see what these guys run at the end of the day, but if they can put it on film and they were an effective player, especially at a program like Oregon in Bucky's case, they're probably at least going to be a serviceable player at the next level. I think Bucky still exceeded most expectations, probably including mine, to be brutally honest with you. But it just goes to show, right? If he puts it on film, more often than not, it's going to translate over, versus some of these other guys who are combine warriors. We see them every single year, and they flame out at the next level because they just don't have what it takes in terms of their film and what they do on the field.
Yeah. Now, to more of a Bears-centric topic, and this is a question that spans, your life as a Bears fan.
Sure.
Who is a Bears draft pick that had you the most excited?
So the most recent one that I will say didn't work out, I got a two-pronged answer here, was Justin Fields. And for me, there was a little personal touch to that. A lot of people do know I'm an Ohio State fan. Go Buckeyes, national champions. You'll love to see it. I have a lot of friends that are Notre Dame fans, so I pissed off a lot of people I know over the last 3 weeks, which was super fun. But I had a personal touch to Justin Fields. I was at his first college game at Georgia when they played Austin PA University on a Labor Day weekend when it was like 90-something degrees. They called the game early because it was too hot. Guys were like being carted off the field with cramps and dehydration, and that Georgia heat was a real thing. I think they ended the game with like 8 minutes left in the fourth quarter. But Justin Fields threw a touchdown pass in that game. And I was like, oh, this kid looks good. All of a sudden it was in the back of my head. I'm gonna follow this guy. Like, there's something there that you can see that like Jake Fromm didn't have at that time. And then he goes to Ohio State and does what he did at Ohio State. And you're like, ooh, okay, this is kind of fun. Like, he's at two schools I like, because, I had family that went to the University of Georgia. So when he got drafted by the Bears, I remember jumping up and down and like waking up my parents at the time of like, holy crap, we got Fields. They're like, what are you being so loud about and yelling and screaming? I'm like, the Bears drafted Justin Fields, Dad. What are you talking about here? Obviously, that didn't work out for him. I hope he works out in the NFL as a whole. He's a player that I root for no matter where he goes now, and certainly appreciate Caleb and what he brings to the table. On the flip side of that, when I was much younger, I remember the 2008 Bears draft class like it was yesterday. Everybody was, Chris Williams is going to be this great offensive tackle from Vanderbilt. And, we got Jay Cutler's guy out, Earl Bennett, in the third round. But it was a small school Conference USA running back that got me all juiced up, and his name was Matt Forte. And then he became one of my favorite Bears of all time. So, for me, it was really like a Matt Forte was my guy. And then to see what he became in the NFL. And I think being young and seeing how the running back position now has evolved in hindsight, I don't think he was appreciated enough. And I think a lot of Bears fans and NFL fans in general feel that way. But man, was he fun to watch. And he was a dog at Tulane, 2,000-yard season coming out of college, falls to the second round. The Bears get him, and he's your bell cow back for the better part of a decade. I have one routine jersey that I tend to wear to Soldier Field, and it's an orange Matt Forte jersey. And there's a reason for that. That was always my guy.
It was an outstanding draft pick, was an outstanding, like everything of his career, just hit the ground running as soon as he got in the NFL. Despite O-line troubles over the years, you could always count on Matt Forte. And
always produced.
On the Justin Fields one, like that, it's painful, right? Like I don't think I was as excited about Caleb Williams as I was Justin Fields, just because of the trauma of Justin Fields and Mitch Trubisky before him, and like of everything going wrong over and over. Like, yes, I was much more excited about what I think Caleb could be, but I think it got tamped down by the entire Justin Fields experience, where Justin Fields, in the wise words of Ted Phillips, we got a good team, we got the coach, we just need the quarterback, right?
Just need the quarterback.
But anyways, Ron, we'll let you get out of here. But any thoughts going into this draft class that you want to share before we close out?
I feel very lucky. I know Mr. Letizia has already put out a great piece about Ashton Gianti, and I think a lot of people already know what they're getting into with a guy like him. He's also put out some other, of the great posts on X about a guy like RJ Harvey from UCF. But I look forward to hopefully building on just more about this running back class. It's a good running back class. Arguably, I don't want to call it generational because I think that term is thrown around too often, but it's definitely one of the strongest position classes in a while at the running back position. And this is coming from, 2 years ago when guys like Bijan Robinson and Jahmyr Gibbs came out. So, this is a running back class that I've heard so many people say can really reshape the NFL at the running back position for the next 5 to 6 years. And when you hear that, that's when you know it's loaded with talent. So I'm excited just to get into the film and dive in and watch more on these guys and just get a feel for, again, I think something that's going severely undersold is we know the Bears need to upgrade the trenches, and that's going to be a huge focus of building the board. There's going to be a huge focus of the fan base. Running back is probably going to be just as important. Ben Johnson loves two running back sets, having that kind of yin and yang in the backfield. And right now, you really only have DeAndre Swift, as much as I know people like Roschon Johnson. So I fully expect the Bears to take a running back in this draft. I don't know if it's going to be as high as the second round. I don't know if it's going to be as low as the fifth round. They're going to take somebody. And I'm hoping to find out who that guy is through watching some film.
I think so, too. And I think the NFL is in desperate need of some real high-end running back talent. When we're seeing a guy like we're seeing what Derrick Henry and Saquon Barkley and a few of these other runners are doing in the league right now, I think the scales have kind of tipped in the football universe towards defenses have gotten too light. Let's just put some hog mollies on the O-line and let the athletes run. Like, I feel like that's where we're starting to get back to now, where it will, and football's always going to go through these shifts, but it has to start at the high school level.
Sure.
And before it to ever reach the NFL, I feel like the last decade has been a shift from the lower levels of football of everything getting lighter on defense. And now it's finally filtering completely into the NFL. And we're seeing the shift back towards running backs mattering. which is
I,
fun.
I think on top of that too, though, Q, even the running backs in general have evolved, right? Like it's not, we're never going to see I don't think we're ever going to see the Mike Allstotts of the world ever again, right? Like, I think you're going to have power runners, right? Derrick Henry is a great example of that in today's NFL. But you're going to see just a new hybrid, just running backs of these guys who are complete football players. And they can become huge pieces of your offense, right? I think Bears fans were largely excited having a guy like David Montgomery, who was a great pass catcher as well as runner. You're starting to see more and more of those guys become the quote unquote bell cow backs of the NFL. And I think that's what makes it exciting. It's not necessarily the, LaDainian Tomlinsons, even though he was arguably ahead of his time, a guy who I think would thrive in this version of the NFL as he did in that last version of the NFL. I think Matt Forte, who we just talked about, is another one of those guys as well. But the position and the talent is just ever changing. I think Ashton Gianti is a great example of that. I did some research, Q. Did you know there's not a lot of running backs that have played in the NFL ever that are 5'9" and over 200 pounds. It's very rare. He's kind of a unicorn. Steve Letizia put it out there on X asking what's a good comp for Ashton Gianti. And I was like, there really isn't one. He really is kind of a unicorn. And I think we're going to see more and more of those guys start coming out in the new wave of NFL running backs.
Yeah. Well, Ron, thank you for jumping on, giving us your thoughts and all your background. And once again, where can people find you if they want to reach out to you, if they want to listen to more of you?
OnTapSportsNet.com, at OnTapSportsNet on the socials, at Loose on Tap on the socials. And you can find me here at Bears on Tap with our boy, Mr. Q here, who puts all this great stuff together for us for a long time. So I look forward to it. And building the board is going to be a great time, Q.
That it will. Thanks, Ron.
Thank you.
All right. And now we are back, and we are talking to one of our scouts here for the second time, because I remembered to hit record this time. Yeah. Luke O'Grady. Luke, how are you doing this evening?
Dude, this as good as I was doing 3 minutes ago when we tried to start this for the first time. No, I'm doing good, man. Like I said, I'm excited. I'm excited to get this going. We got a really good team here. It seems like building the board, and this is the first year where I've been asked to try and participate, and I'm excited to get going.
Yeah. Now, why don't we start this off? You telling some of our listeners or viewers a little bit about your background, where they can find you, find anything you put out into the Twitter space and the internet, whatever it might be.
Yeah. Born and raised in Canada, just outside of Toronto, and moved to the East Coast probably about a decade ago now. So live in New Brunswick, Canada. Dad was a Bears fan. That's how I was so lucky to become a Bears fan as well. And, just really been a diehard football fan my whole life. I've been on Twitter since Twitter was, like kind of a pretty like random place. And like, slowly but surely you'd see like people following the Chad Johnson stuff and coming over. But, like just been a Bears fan my whole life, like kind of been always like doing the analysis and the observations for draft class coming in stuff. And then the last 2 or 3 years, I'll say, working with Steve Letizia at CFC Bears, like we've slowly have started like really doing the draft stuff and taking it more seriously and building rankings and stuff like that. So when Steve asked if I wanted to, I think actually you asked, but Steve recommended when I wanted to participate this year, it felt like a no-brainer. I think I said when we first the first take at this, like I obviously wouldn't consider myself a scout by any means, but I've watched enough film on my bit today to know it looks good and know it doesn't, and over time, these are like the things that you start to just pick up on and try and try and piece it all together. I think that's kind of the fun thing of doing the draft stuff is you can think you've got it all down and understand what you're watching and be dead wrong about someone and just keep realizing every year that there's more to the equation of what's going to be a successful NFL pro than maybe you realize at first.
Yeah, I think some people would call it fun, some people would call it crazy, but I'm in the fun department, right? Like I see it as fun. But looking at the scouting aspect of this, Luke, what is your favorite position to scout and why?
Favorite position to scout is wide receivers and probably by relation DBs, but more wide receivers. That's when I played football. That's the position I played. And it's also probably just my favorite position to watch in football. I think there's just so much like grace paired with like raw execution and like understanding, and you got to be smart and you got to be athletic. And it's I just think it's the best. And because of that, I think it probably lends itself to being a better job of doing a better job of evaluating some of that talent. Like you said, like, having played it, you kind of have that natural understanding of what it's supposed to look like, and you kind of do a better job of pointing that out. But by the same merit, like, I don't think I do a good job with O-line or like I was saying to you, like a running back. Like it might take me 4 or 5 games of watching a running back to really like start to get an idea of the essence of the player. Whereas you can give me like 1 or 2 good quarters of a receiver tape, and I'll have an idea of what I think about him.
Yeah, and that's something we were kind of getting into, and this is right about the point where I realized, oh, forgot to hit record. But I have a theory with all this that, you become good at scouting what you understand. What you did well in athletics yourself is what you probably understand the best. I've never been fast or agile in my
Yeah.
life. Like fast to me is like a 4.640, right? Or a
Right.
4.740. Like, so speed is not something I've ever, or change of direction, unless you're like a 300-pound human being, is not something that I have a good feel for. And it's something where I'm the opposite. I feel like, you get me a game of an offensive lineman, I have a pretty good feeling about what that player
Yeah.
might be eventually or could be. You give me one game of, you mentioned earlier Malik Neighbors. Give me one game of Malik Neighbors, I'm probably asking some questions. Someone who knows that wide receiver better,
Yeah.
like, is that good? Like, is that?
Yeah.
They all just look fast to me. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, we were saying speed's a funny one. Like speed is one where you kind of have to like take as many data points as you can to try and connect the dots. Like someone can look fast in any one game or any one season versus certain competition, and then they play against real like other fast guys, and maybe like they kind of disappear a little bit, or maybe they didn't look so fast when you were watching them, and then they go out and run a 4.4, and you got to go back and go, okay, like you try and piece all the pieces together. So it's certainly like not a science. It feels like it's an art more than a science. But it's just one of those ones that I kind of haven't done it and haven't like the admiration and watched enough of it. I feel like that's probably the one I'm best at, but definitely my favorite to do. Like I was, today I was just pouring over like the big board and pretty much strictly doing receivers, and it was just like just so fun.
Now, when you're watching receivers, what is a non-negotiable trait that you're looking for? That's like an absolute must-have, or just something that it's the first thing you are targeting when you flip the tape on?
Yeah, I think must-have. It probably lends itself to stuff that it's hard to coach out and hard to like improve upon. So it feels like if you aren't a very natural hands catcher, like if you just don't absorb that ball, it's not something that you just start to do, and it can be a bit of a deal breaker. Like it was one of the reasons why, like when I was watching Quinten Johnson tape, I was like, dude, there's so much to like about this. Like the upside's totally there, but like you just didn't see any really good examples of him just like smoothly absorbing that ball. Like every time he'd jump, he was alligator arming it, and when it would hit him in the hands, like it didn't like it doesn't get sucked in the way that like a really good receiver like a Keenan Allen does. And when you have that, it's like, man, you really can't like that feels like the foundation. Like, can you catch the ball? And if you don't have that foundation, you can't really build a house around it, kind of thing.
Yeah, and that's an interesting one. I never thought that much about that. Obviously, being, as we said, more of an offensive line, defensive line guy, but that's something that I'll have to pay more attention to this year when I'm watching receivers, because that's something that had really never stuck out to me that much. But I think is a really valid point, a really clear thing that you can find and look for. Now, I do have a question for you about, because you talked about it a little bit on the favorite position to scout, and I didn't want to try to jump the next question with it if that was your answer. But when you see a guy who goes and runs a great 40, but his tape didn't match it,
Yeah.
how do you reconcile that? How do you feel about that when the tape does not match the time?
I've gone like back and forth on this, and like it probably still will be something that I'll change as like you do this more and you get proven wrong in certain situations more and more. But it used to be that like if it didn't look fast on tape, but you went out and ran a fast 40, my thought process was like, okay, he can run fast, just for whatever reason it's not coming up on tape. But I've kind of flipped on that. I've kind of flipped it like you can do things to go and run a really really fast 40, but that's not exactly football speed. Like it's slightly the same skill, but the training that these NFL like prospects could do to get a fast 40 starts to become really, really like little about football and more about like just basic athletics training. And you can get a guy that when you're asking him to do routes or asking him to focus on like finding open spaces or like do the part of actually catching the ball, you lose a lot of that just mind, like shut the mind off and run a straight line as fast as you can. So I think this year looking at it, like if I have a player that I know just doesn't look like he's separating, doesn't look like he's like that much faster than the guys around him, if he goes out and runs a high 4.3 or a low 4.4, I don't know if that's going to be enough like this year for me to say, okay, maybe he's faster than I realize. I think speed is one of those things that, at least now, in my opinion, feels like tape gives you a better idea of specifically than the combine.
Yeah, the mental processing aspect of it is always what I'm curious about, how much that might slow guys down when they're not just able to flip a switch, say I'm going in a straight line, right? Like
Yeah.
I have to think about how this route, how what I'm reading in the coverage and what I'm seeing the guy next to me do. Is he still running the rub route? Am I still having to hit that timing right? Like
Yeah.
that type of stuff I think gets in the way. But now let's think back to last year's draft a little bit here. And you weren't with us last year, so this is going to be a complete surprise for me. Like when I was speaking with Steve, I was like, I bet he's going to do Brandon Coleman. Like I was like,
Yeah.
Brandon Coleman. But who was one of your guys in last year's draft class?
Last year's draft class. That's a good. I was really, really high on Ladd McConkey. I had him as my wide receiver 4, but I probably didn't have enough respect for Brian Thomas in that class. I thought it was like there was 5 receivers and then there was everybody else. I was really high on Ladd McConkey, but he ended up going higher than I think projections had him going into the draft. So maybe that one wasn't really as much as a disparity between what I thought and what he ended up going. Because the whole time I was screaming, this guy's a round 1 player, and he ended up sneaking in. So maybe that was a bit of a difference. But over the last couple of years, one that I was banging the table for, and I couldn't understand how more people didn't see it. And I think the draft reflected that, and then the play in the NFL has since backed that up, was Moro Ajomo for the Eagles. I was like, dude, I don't maybe he's not the best run defender, and maybe he'll be limited in how he'll be able to project to the NFL as a situational pass rusher. But as that situational pass rusher, I was like, this guy's high end tape at the time was in that year was in my opinion as good as Kalijah Cansey's. And I was like, I just don't see how that itself, just in the pass rushing aspect, collapse in the pocket, being that third down interior rusher, wasn't going to bring him up into the 2nd and 3rd round. But he ended up going in the 7th round, I think, to the Eagles.
Criminal.
Of course. And he has looked exactly that in that role. This year, even he's expanded a little bit and has looked better on the run defense side. But he's already, I would say, a top 15, top 20 interior pass rusher in the NFL. And that was one where I was like, I knew it.
You're preaching to me, man. You're speaking to my heart right now, because I think I had a late 3rd round grade on Ojomo, and I was just like, I did not understand it, why he was not going in that draft. Seriously? It was like when the Eagles got him to 7th, I was like, that's still of a century.
He kept staying there. I have the messages from Steve. I was like, dude, this guy must have an injury that we don't know about or something.
Yeah, right. It's always hard to gauge that, because
there's something you don't know.
Last year, Bo Limmer just kept falling, and I was like, I don't think Bo Limmer's a star, but he can play in this league. Why is he here in the 6th round for the Rams? And it's there has to be an injury, and it just ended up the guy starts almost every game for him. But
yeah, man, the Rams. It's been so impressive how much they've pivoted from the fuck them picks kind of thing to the how well and how completely. How their roster in the last 2 years has changed from being trade the picks, bring in talented players, build around the quarterback you have, make the push, to we only have the assets now to build through the draft, and how well they've done, man. They have just been hitting on so many of my favorite picks the last couple of years. Another one, a player, it's 2 years now for him that I was higher on than most. In my rankings, I had him as the 4th defensive tackle in the class, and Steve didn't even have him in the top 10, was Kobe Turner for the Rams. I was like, man, I see too much good. And it was one of those things where, he was at Wake Forest. So sometimes it's not the toughest of competition, but and that's another thing you kind of have to leverage is how good are you versus your competition versus how good will you be versus a whole roster of NFL players. But, and Bo Limmer, another great example, just waiting and picking up dogs in the trenches. Steve Avila, they got, Jared Verse, they got Fisk, they got, they have just been, hitting in the trenches the last few years.
So Kobe Turner was actually a strong learning point for me that I will never forget, because I didn't get turned on to him until later in the process. And it was like, okay, I see some stuff here, but I was so geared into offensive line thought process of you got to be somewhat clean in your play on the O-line, right? You need to show some restraint, some level of technique. And I was watching Kobe Turner. I was like, this guy's just out of control.
Wrecking ball.
Like, yeah, he doesn't know where he's going or why. He's just going everywhere 100 miles an hour, and I didn't like it. And I adjusted that some last year after seeing that, maybe defensive tackle, that probably isn't the right mentality. And still, Braden Fisk, I was lower on Braden Fisk than I should have been for the same
honestly,
reason.
I was too. I remember thinking that the Fisk pick felt like a tip of the cap to the Verse pick,
Mm-hmm.
but I remember thinking like I don't know if I love that. It kind of felt like polls like using the fact that someone's from Chicago to like break a tiebreaker. It was like because you already drafted Verse, like you might as well go for Fisk too. But I was pleasantly surprised. Like all the things that you would have touted as like an upside for Fisk, you pretty much saw instantly, and he did a really good job of cleaning up the stuff you'd be worried about.
But so this year, I'm taking a bit different of an approach with my defensive tackles of like, I'm just looking for havoc creators.
Yeah.
Like I'm just saying like, throw the caution to the wind. I just want guys who are like hell to block. That's
Totally.
like, and that's what I've already found one or two guys like that, but we'll save that for a defensive tackle episode.
And
now,
it's funny how that happens. Like each year you do it, you come away with a couple of like, I'll know that for next time. I think like recently, like we were talking about it with receivers, is that like I will not let speed like specifically 40 speed has to be something that like maybe you go to if you're completely unsure about it, because I've just been so many times guys have gone out and put together like really good 40s that didn't look fast, and then it ended up just being that track speed and the game speed didn't translate. And on the flip side, there are guys where you're like, this guy in game just moves faster than everyone else and finds space and gets open, and then the 40 time doesn't reflect it. And I just decided, this year tape is going to be king as far as like evaluating receivers for me versus the 40 time. 40 time would pretty much only be like a tiebreaker, I'd say, unless it's something like he goes out and runs a 4.7. But even then, it's like, man, there's so many Cooper Kupps or Puka Nakuas or Stephon Diggs or, Allen Robinsons. The list goes on where it's like, don't doubt the tape if you've been given reason to doubt it just because of a 40 time.
Yeah, it's incredible. You can throw together all the stats, all the measurements you want, and it'll never amount to equal to tape. It feels
totally
like. So it's a definitely an interesting thing to think through and to experience for yourself.
Yeah.
But looking at our final question here, who is a Bears draft pick that had you the most excited? This can be in your life. This can be in recent history. However you want to approach it.
It's probably got to be Justin Fields. Honestly, it was the trade up. It was like we were coming off of Trubisky, who like I hated at the time. I hated the time of the pick, and I pretty much never warmed up to him throughout the process of him being a Bear. Whereas like I loved Justin Fields coming out. I was like so enamored by him. Thought he was going to be like the perfect like next level pro. And when I saw the Giants thing leave and the Bears thing come onto the screen with Justin Fields still on the board, I was like, couldn't believe it. Like I was like almost emotional. I was like, oh my God, like the Bears did the thing. It's funny though, like looking back on it now, like that Justin Fields has become another one of those guys where it's like, I'll know better next time when I'm evaluating a player like Justin Fields. Like I had a lot of learnings of like what I thought was amazing quarterbacking. And then looking back on it now, like I feel like the last 3 or 4 years, I've completely changed the things that I look for, like in what a good quarterback is in college and translating. And I think if I went back and looked back in Justin Fields, it would have been a little bit more evident. But at that time, man, I thought he was like close to being my QB1 in the class.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think a lot, the entire football world learned a lot from Justin Fields, because there were a lot of there's been a lot of stats and different aspects of his game that have come to light. Like, when he was drafted, was pressure to sack ratio even a question? Was that even discussed?
Seriously. It
might
have been that Justin Fields was the catalyst to that, because now it's such a big discussion as far as like, that feels like a very modern wisdom thing, is that like sacks and the pressure to sack ratio is a much more stable stat for the quarterback versus the offensive line around him, which probably felt like absurd to people like evaluating quarterback play the last like 30 years. And maybe it was Justin Fields that kicked it off, but it's become a really like popular way to like look at it and like kind of change the paradigm around that. And I think Justin Fields was a good example of A lot of really good looking stuff, like accurate when he has the chance, like, freak athlete, like one of one type athlete at the position. Success in a good program, like playing against good competition, like played good in big games, like all the things that you want. But it was easy to overlook things like he's got a really long and elongated throwing motion. He does take sacks at a rate way higher than people realize, and it's like people don't realize that you take a sack on a drive, the odds of that drive finishing in a touchdown now is like something like 2 or 3%. Like
It's almost as good as a turnover. Like it's
you cannot take sacks. And now there has been, I think, honestly, even like some like market correction even last year. Like this is one of those things. I had Jaden Daniels as my QB4. I had him below Penix, and then I had him below May and Caleb because his pressure to sack rate was the highest in the class, and like one of the higher we've seen in a while. And it kind of gave me that idea of like, pressure to sack rate itself. Not all pressures and sacks are created equal. You probably do need to actually put the tape on, and how important like the confidence that he has in the players and the scheme and the coaching around him. Like it, again, there's just a lot more data points to like break down what that concern or that issue is in someone's game. But maybe like if you'd gone back and looked at the Jaden Daniels stuff, like not all sacks and pressures are created equal versus like how they would have looked with Justin Fields. And I think last year would have been my first year to stepping back to say you shouldn't just write someone off specifically because of the pressure to sack rate.
Right. And even on the Jaden Daniels topic, I saw and part of this was over adjusting coming off Justin Fields, like
Completely.
for the Bears. But I saw so much Justin Fields in his college tape that it was like I had him at QB3, but it was like looking like I might have been wrong on that. He probably should have been a little higher.
I know. Yeah. I mean, I think one, I underestimated how valuable the fact is that he has such a snappy release of the football. And two, another thing that I think, especially with quarterbacks, is something that going forward I'll never underestimate again is poise. There's something to be said about like someone that believes in themselves and doesn't feel the pressure of the moment. And like you can just see even when he's in, like there is like there's a calm about him in the way he operates in offense. And it was completely true at LSU as well. And it's something that you can see like those guys that don't have it. And I think like going forward is something that I'll weigh a lot more like I'll weigh a lot heavier when like evaluating quarterbacks is that like they need to be able to like be like the calm within the storm. And Jaden Daniels has that in spades, man.
All right. Well, thank you so much for jumping on with us tonight, Luke. And we'll be talking to you again soon as we get these positional episodes rolling for building the board. But in the meantime, everyone make sure to go follow Luke on Twitter at Luke O'Grady. And Luke, any final thoughts before we close this out?
No, I'm excited to get going. I think we kind of divvied up the positions, and I'm going to be focusing a lot on wide receivers and DBs. So I'm excited to get that going. I've already got some pretty good recommendations from the followers and from the Twitter base about like maybe some other smaller name guys that I should be checking out. But if you see this and you have some people that you want to check out, or you want to bounce some ideas around about any prospects that you're looking at as well, follow me and message me right here, at Luke O'Grady on Twitter.
Let him know. All right, thanks, Luke.
Yeah, cheers.
All right, and now we are joined by one of our scouts, Steve Letizia. Steve, how are you doing this evening?
I'm doing pretty good, Q. It's a good day to be a Bears fan. Just hired Ben Johnson yesterday, so it's hard not to be feeling good.
Isn't it though? Like it's I don't know about you. I was so like just beside myself because I was so resigned to the idea of Mike McCarthy that I was like, fine, it'll be fine. Like I don't want to talk about it. And it was like, boom.
I have 34 years of experience of the Bears making the wrong decision. So them making the right decision really took me by surprise, but a very happy surprise.
Very happy surprise indeed. But we're here to talk building the board. And Steve, first things first, we want to, when we're talking about this with our scouts, we want to talk about you. We want you to be able to give some background info to our listeners, the people who are reading your articles, and info about yourself and where they can find your work outside of the Building the Board project.
Sure. Yeah. First of all, you can follow me on Twitter at CFC Bears. These days, that's where most of my content is going to be. Obviously, you can read my content on Tap Sportsnet. That's where all my scouting reports are going to be written for Building the Board. So we're really excited about doing that again this year. We did it last year, and I think we did a pretty good job. It was a ton of fun. And we just started even earlier this year. So we're really excited to be a part of this again. But those, yeah. And then on YouTube, the Chicago Football Connection podcast, I do that with my co-host Luke. That's those 3 areas. That's really where all my content's going to be.
Yeah, and make sure you're going and following Steve. He puts out some great content, puts out, some college football content, NFL draft content year round. So just a great follow if you're into the draft and a Bears fan, or both. But Steve, what's your favorite position to scout?
I think you know this about me already, and I think if anyone follows me on Twitter, they probably get a good idea. But my favorite position to scout is offensive line. It's so much fun because every snap there's something going on. Sometimes, I'll scout every position, and like safeties and cornerbacks. To me, it just gets a little boring. But I just like scouting the offensive line because, like I said, something's going on every play. Every play is meaningful. No matter what happens on the play, every play you can learn something about that prospect. So that's why I really love scouting them. And I just to be honest, I think it's the position I'm best at scouting because I've focused on it so much. I've kind of honed my craft there more than maybe other positions. So offensive line is definitely, I love watching the big boys, watching them get out in space and like finding a cornerback or a safety out in space is just the absolute best. It brings a smile on my face every time I watch it. So offensive line for sure, followed closely by defensive line. Got to watch the trenches.
I mean, I'm with you on that. That's I will say there's a small part of me that almost likes D-line better just because the tape is half as long. Just because they're on a rotation, it's like I can power through a D-line tape in 10 minutes, whereas like with O-line, I'm spending at least 30 minutes on it. But when you're watching an offensive lineman, what's a non-negotiable for you? Like when to clarify on that, what is a trait, an aspect of their play that you are looking for where it's like they got to have this, they got to be able to do this or have this going for them?
This is an easy one. When you said this to me, it's like it came right to my mind right away. And this would be true for offensive line, defensive line, really most positions, offensive, defensive line, essentially it's power. It's a physical league. So on the offensive line, if we're talking on offensive line, it's anchor. Making sure that you're not getting pushed back into your quarterback. That's the first thing. It's a physical league, so if you can't win with power, you're not going to win in the league. You can be as athletic as you want, and you can maybe hide. If you are super athletic, you can kind of hide with scheme and hide with play calling. But if you don't have just the requisite core strength and anchor in your lower half, you're not going to be a wildly successful offensive lineman. So I'm always looking at power first. I obviously really want to see athleticism too, but that's kind of just like icing on the cake on top of the power. And then with the defensive line, it's kind of the same thing. You have to be able to win with power, because if you can't win with power, then offensive linemen in the NFL are too athletic. You're not going to be able to just run around them. You got to be able to run through the guy first and then work off that. If you can run through a guy and run around the guy, then you have a special player.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a very fair one to go to and to start with. That's a base one of what you're watching for. I think that makes a lot of sense. Now, if we're looking at last year's draft class, because you worked on this project last year, and we went through. I mean, I think you watched something like 70 or 80 of our 100 players on the board. Like you had a lot of coats on the wall. But who was one of your guys last year?
Yeah, I had a lot of my guys. A couple of guys that stood out, just who turned out to be good. I was a big fan of Ladd McConkey pretty early on in the process. Obviously, that worked out with the Chargers. Just a really helpful player. He had injury concerns, but like when he was on the field at Georgia, he was a top-notch player. So it's no surprising that he transitioned to the NFL pretty quickly. And the other one was more of a sleeper, was Brandon Coleman from TCU. He was an offensive lineman, played a little guard, played a little tackle, and he's starting for the Commanders in the NFC Championship game next week at left tackle. And when I watched him, again, the first thing I noticed with him was this guy has NFL level power and strength. Like this guy's not getting moved around. This guy's is anchoring easily against power. I really liked his hand use and everything like that too. But that's really what stood out to me. And I wrote. He was one of the first building the board articles I wrote last year, I believe. It was very early in the process. And I think it got the least amount of views of all the articles I wrote. Interestingly, just a little fun fact. And then he turned out to be one of the better prospects, coming out of this last draft. At least if you're talking sleepers, guys like non-first round guys. So he was a guy that I really liked. And he went just before the Bears were on the clock. I wonder if they would have taken him if they had the chance. But yeah, I really, really liked him, and he's so far so good when it comes to him.
Yeah, and so your first guy, Ladd, like I felt like last year I ended up I think he ended up my wide receiver 4 after the big 3 of like Marv, Neighbors, and Rome. But it was like he could have landed anywhere from like 4 to 7, right? Because it felt like such a deep wide receiver class. But it was just seeing his results this year, it was a nice reminder for me of like to trust my eyes on it all, because it's like you watch the tape, you're like, man, he cuts different than guys. Like he wants it more than a lot of guys on the field. You can see it coming through the tape, and I think it's really cool to see him have that success after having recognized it on tape. But with Brandon Coleman, like I remember you sent something about being high on him, and I went and watched. I was like, oh yeah, this guy deserves some praise. Like this guy's got a lot of what you're looking for. But I wasn't quite sold that he could like jump in the league and be a good starter, right? Then I saw Washington was, they cut Charles Leno, and it was like, well, Brandon Coleman's going to be our starter that we're relying on all year. I was like, well, Washington, I hope you guys are ready for the number 1 pick, because like a lot of your roster looks pretty sketchy to me right now, and here we are, they're in the NFC freaking championship. But he's played great for them.
Yes. I'll be honest, I don't know if I saw him starting right away, especially at left tackle. I did say he could stick at tackle when a lot of people were putting him at guard, but I'm even even though I was very high on him, I'm still a little bit surprised that he's been as successful as he's been. But yeah,
he's killed it. Now, last question we got here. Who is a Bears draft pick that had you the most excited in your life, like, or in your time as someone who pays a lot of attention to the draft, I guess I would say?
It's very easy to just go right to the quarterbacks. I mean, Caleb Williams, that was incredible. Obviously, even though we knew it was coming when they drafted him. Justin Fields, when they traded up for him, oh my God, that was a special, special moment. Like, just it felt like everything was coming together. Even Mitch Trubisky, when they traded up with him, like all those guys I was really excited about. I think it's easy to go with the quarterback, so I'll go with a different one, and I'll keep this more recent as well. I was really excited when they got Darnell Wright. Darnell Wright was my offensive tackle 1 in the 2020, was that 23 class?
Yeah.
Over Paris Johnson, who's also been pretty good in the NFL. But Darnell Wright, I was really excited when they got him because, again, it was another guy that was very early on in the process. And I think everyone who's into the draft likes to be the first guy or like an early guy on a guy, and I definitely enjoy that. So when they drafted one of my guys, I was ecstatic, and it's turned out pretty good. Darnell Wright has been a hell of a player, and I'm really, really excited to see what he can do with a competent offense. Because I think we always talk about how, Caleb Williams and the quarterbacks are held back by bad play calling and bad scheme and everything, which is 100% true. But offensive linemen and every wide receivers, everyone's held back when you have a bad scheme, bad play calling. So I think Darnell Wright with Ben Johnson, if he's everything that we think he can be, is going to just take that next step and be in the Pro Bowl conversation next year.
And to your point about that, like I had big questions about what the Bears offense was developing for their offensive linemen, or how they were developing offensive linemen, how they've gotten guys better. Like before Getsy got fired, I was really scratching my head as to how Braxton Jones had seemingly gone backwards since his rookie year.
Yeah.
Like his technique had just been going the wrong direction. It was like, there's clearly a disconnect here with the teaching of what they want him to do. And you didn't quite see it with Darnell Wright the same way. Well, what I felt like I saw was a lack of growth from what he, I was expecting a big jump. He made a nice jump, but I was expecting a bigger one, because you'd think, another year in the NFL, another year of learning it, there's a long way to go. And I really don't think the Bears fully put him in a position to take that big jump. And, there's stuff being talked about. Maybe Hank Fraley's coming over here. At the very least, Ben Johnson's coaching tree is littered with offensive line coaches. Joe Philbin, it was one of the first guys to hire Ben Johnson. He's a former O-line coach, comes from a Mike Holmgren tree. And we know there's some O-line littered in there. And Mike Sherman, the former Packers coach, former O-line coach. There's a lot of reason to think that Ben Johnson his history screams O-line matters a lot, and we need to be teaching these guys right. So, I mean, I think Darnell Wright's a great answer. I'm hoping we see a massive jump from him this year, where that teaching can step up for him. But Steve, are there any early favorites? I didn't tell you this question beforehand, but are there any early favorites you got in this draft class that you're looking at? You know, nothing in cement. It's all fluid right now, but guys who are intriguing you right now.
How much time you got? A lot of guys. I'll stick with just the offensive line and maybe a defensive line guy if one comes to me. But one guy that I wrote, one of the first articles I wrote this year, and I tweeted out this immediately after Ben Johnson, is Wyatt Millam, I think it's pronounced, from West Virginia, the left tackle from West Virginia. I really like him. Some people I have him like a top 25 player right now, which is still fluid, but he's going to be in kind of that range. I've seen some people have him in like 80 in the 80s. I've seen other people have him, in the first round conversation, which I think is great. But he's another guy, great power, first of all, and then also has the athleticism on top of that. So he's a bigger guy, like almost 6'7", I believe, 320 pounds, something like that. So a bigger guy that I think that Ben Johnson will like. Looking at the Lions offensive line, it's a lot of there's size there, and strength, and then athleticism on top of that. And I think Milam has all that. If you watch him, he played left tackle at West Virginia. He's only got 32-inch arms. He's probably not going to play left tackle in the pros. And I think when you watch him going into it, if you watch him as a left tackle, you're not going to be impressed. If you watch him knowing that he's going to move inside to guard, you're going to be impressed, because all of his best pass block reps came on jump sets where he gets his hands on the guys really early. And I think that just translates really well with a move to inside. So he's a guy I really like. I'm trying to think of there are so many, but by Milam for sure. Jonas Savanea from Arizona, another offensive lineman. And then let me pick one defender, which is hard to do because I really like this defensive tackle class. And Mason Graham, another guy I wrote about. I mean, if he's available for the Bears at 10, which I think there's a non-0% chance that happens, I think he's the pick. You got to just take him. He just transforms your defensive line.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. I think I've got right now, I've watched about something like 40 guys, and there's only, just to speak a little to the depth of this class, or not depth, but the high-end talent of this class, I've only got 3 guys with a grade of all-pro future, and that's Abdul Carter, Ashton Jeanty, and Mason Graham. Like, Mason Graham is up there for me. I'm with you there.
All 3 of those guys are studs. Yeah. Abdul Carter. He's a what's his name? I'm blanking on from the Micah Parsons clone.
Yeah.
I know it's like lazy because they both went to Penn State. They both were number 11, but like, it just is what it is. That's
the similarities are there for sure.
Yeah, for sure.
But everyone, make sure you're going to follow Steve for all his scouting takes here over at CFC Bears on Twitter, over on YouTube as well, to make sure you catch his podcast. Is it the CFC Bears podcast? Chicago Football Connection podcast?
Sure. Yeah. I don't know if we have an official name for it, so we'll just call it that.
Okay. And make sure you go check him out. And Steve, thanks for jumping on with us tonight. And we'll be hearing a lot more from you soon as we get into these scouting reports, these scouting episodes that we have coming out.
Awesome. Thanks, Q.
And now we're joined by another one of our scouts, Tom Cavanaugh. Tom was with us last year and did an outstanding job looking at a ton of the receivers. He handled a ton of the receiver workload and also edge among some other positions for us. But Tom, how are you doing today?
I'm doing good, Q. I am glad to be back working towards the draft. This is like my favorite thing to do, and I'm working with a bunch of great people who do amazing work. So I'm really, really excited about this.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, Tom, can you tell everyone a little bit about your background, where they can find your work, where they can find you on Twitter, YouTube, anything that you got going on?
Yeah, so I do a podcast that you could find on YouTube or Apple Podcast or Spotify. It's Bears Blog Boys. I do it with my friend Snyder. We actually just recorded an episode about Ben Johnson today, which I know everyone is talking about. So that's mainly where you can find my work. I do a lot of stuff on Twitter. I do stuff with OnTap as it pertains to the draft. My background is as I'm a huge Bears fan, and I think around my senior year of high school, I really got into the draft and really started appreciating how much of a difference it makes for your team. Especially if you it's fun to really do that stuff for yourself, scout players and stuff like that. I think ever since I've just been really, really into it. And I've, wanted to write about it and do coverage about it for the Bears.
Yeah. Now, when so the next question here is, what's your favorite position to scout and why? But what you just said, like being like you first got really into the draft in like senior year of high school, did you have any evolution of like your favorite positions to watch in any way?
For sure. So like I think like the ones that like came easy to me were like running back, because like I think it's a very straightforward, like there is nuances, but like at the end of the day, like it's pretty easy to see which running backs are the best and which ones aren't. And it's like a very like highlight position. I think it evolved to receiver, like the appreciation of like the reps that receivers aren't catching the ball, and like how you can learn from those. I think that's kind of where it evolved to. And then edge rusher, I think in terms of the trenches, is definitely my second favorite, maybe my favorite. I don't know. I go back and forth all the time. But edge is like appreciating like what makes a great edge rusher. I think you really have to kind of know the details of that position. And that's, as I've grown as a scout, that's where I think my favorite is now.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. Now, you mentioned about the watching the plays where they're not getting the football at receiver. And one thing that, like, last year's probably the first time that I watched receiver a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm curious your opinion on this. Do you care if a receiver it might be like an RPO, might be a run play, but do you care if he's practicing his release on run plays?
No, I don't really care that
Okay.
much. If you're like a loafer and like aren't doing anything, like, George Pickens has some reps where he's like literally not doing anything if he's not getting the ball. Okay, if it's to that extreme, then I care a little bit, but like not really. It's cool when you get a good release on a run play, but other than that, not too big of a deal for me.
Okay. Because I was, like I said, last year was my first time really, really looking close at receiver. I was like, man, I like that he's like he's getting in the corner's head when it's a run play. But I mean, I was curious about how much anyone actually cares about that. But
It's definitely a little gravy on top. It's not
yeah,
it's not a bad thing by any means.
yeah. Now you said edge is probably your favorite. Now, what is a non-negotiable trait for you at edge? A trait that it might be the first thing you're looking for, might be something that you absolutely need if you're going to draft a guy.
Yeah. Oh man, that's so tough, because I think there's like a lot of things they have to have, but I think explosiveness at the end of the day is the most important. I could say like bend and change the direction too. Like if you're going to be one of a high level edge rusher in the NFL, you have to have some type of bend, some type of ability to tilt towards the quarterback. But I think it all starts with your get off and how explosive you are. If you're not explosive, you're just not going to be. It's just the reality of it. Like you can look at any edge rusher, if they're not meeting like athletic thresholds, from an athletic standpoint, and an explosiveness standpoint, I think you're just going to be a very limited player. And that's almost it is a non-negotiable for edge rushers if I'm like considering drafting you in the top 40.
And when you're talking about the thresholds for explosiveness, you're talking like broad jump and like 10-yard split, or those
All
what
of
you're
it.
looking
Yep.
at?
Yeah. I mean, if you have two good numbers and then one not so good number, then okay, maybe I don't care as much. Like if your vertical is not insanely good, then okay, maybe I'm willing to excuse that if you have the other two good numbers. But I think all of the athletic testing on top of looking explosive on tape, because some guys like Trayvon Walker, I thought was like a great example of unbelievable athlete, like one of the most athletic players at any position we've ever seen. You turn on the tape, that's not you don't really come away thinking he's this rare athlete. And I think there's a couple guys in this class like that, but I think it all kind of has to coincide with each other for me to really buy into you.
Now, you mentioned the vertical jump. What would you say to someone who says, I don't care how high an edge rusher can jump? Why does that matter?
So don't look at the testing in itself, right? Yeah, when is a guy going to be jumping as high as they can in the air from a standstill? It's not about that. It's about your explosiveness. Like if you can jump really high from a standstill, that means you're really, really explosive. I think vertical jump specifically is a great test, even maybe more so than the broad jump. Like if you pass that, then like Chop Robinson last year, great example, right? That dude was jumping out the gym. I think he jumped over like 40 inches for being like 250 pounds. It's clearly translated right to the NFL. He's one of them players at his position. So again, it's more of just like a checking of the box that, hey, this confirms that you're really explosive on tape. This is a test that tests your explosiveness.
Okay. And I've always kind of seen it the same way. It's like you're talking about the quick twitch fibers, like that lower body twitchiness. Vertical does a lot to say that, and I can't actually sit here and knock anyone's vertical because I think mine is somewhere in the teens now. But
Mine was horrible. I'm right there with you.
Yeah, but moving on, who was one of your guys in last year's draft class, and how did they end up doing this year?
Man, so one of my guys from last year's draft class was Ladd McConkey. And I think I talked about him on this very segment, which is funny to look back on. He's actually blown away. Like, I obviously had very high expectations for him. But, I mean, to be like the second best behind Brian Thomas, he's arguably the second best receiver. Obviously, it's just 1 year. It could change. Mm-hmm. But to be the second most impactful receiver, I should say, in year one, I mean, he was better than I ever could imagine hitting the ground running. I think some people were concerned about his size, how he would hold up against press and like in contested catch situations. And I think he blew all those concerns out of the water with how he performed. I mean, he was just an absolute stud.
Yeah. Now I am going to press you a little on it because I probably should have mentioned this to you before we started. 2 of our scouts have already mentioned Ladd McConkey as their guys.
No.
So is there another one that you have in mind?
Yeah, there's definitely more other guys. I'm not trying to like toot my own horn with some of my guys, but I guess on the opposite side of the spectrum, Adonai Mitchell, who I was way higher, I feel like, than most people, where I just like, this dude has the bones to be a number 1 wide receiver. And, he had problems staying on the field and like beating out Alec Pierce. And I think just being where he was supposed to be within the route concept stuff, you don't really have the firsthand knowledge with like what these coaches exactly want them to do. And I think like as his route tree and stuff like kind of expanded, he kind of struggled to acclimate in the NFL. I focused a lot on receivers last year, so I'm sorry I'm not giving you other positions, but that's another side of the spectrum where I saw this super talented, physically capable guy and who I thought had the skill set to hit the ground running right away. But I don't think mentally it didn't really click for him as fast as I would want it to, and obviously as fast as he would want it to.
Yeah, and I think one of the things you run in with AD Mitchell and that you get all over the draft is you can't predict a guy's opportunity until he's on a team, right? When you're stuck behind what's his name? Michael Pittman and
Josh
Downs and Alec Pierce, like 3 guys who were all all second round picks, actually, I believe. Alec Pierce might have been early third or late second, somewhere in there. But guys who the team has invested in, that they're trying to get something out of them too. Like, it's hard to predict when you're going to see the field. And I think it's hard to grow when you're not seeing the field consistently. I think that's what AD ran into.
100%. And I think on top of that, Josh Downs was hurt very early in the year. They tried to, because he's their third best receiver, right? Or however you said it, second best receiver, AD Mitchell. Like, from a talent perspective, they tried to make AD Mitchell a slot receiver, right? Which he was probably practicing all of training camp as an outside receiver, which is what he was at Texas. He's trying to learn a new role in the NFL, his head spinning. And then when Josh Downs comes back, he moves back outside basically full time. And it's just like, he never really felt like he found his footing, even though there were, I think the majority of reps, he was creating a lot of separation. I don't think he was like hitting his landmarks correctly, being where he was supposed to be. I think that was more of his issue and why he wasn't getting the ball as much. And he had a ton of drops too. But yeah.
Well, and that's such an interesting aspect too. Cause like I remember watching the same being like, some dudes can just separate. Yes. Right. Like, and it's like this guy can beat anyone one-on-one on basketball on his team. Yep. I'm sure. Like, he has that type of athleticism, but that's not always the game either.
Right.
Right. Like, you have a route that you're supposed to run. And how do you weigh that when you're watching a receiver that, like, Anthony Miller can just get open, but he ain't running his route?
That's the perfect comparison. I think that's something like I think Jerry Jeudy had like a lot of struggles with this as well. And like, you could see the high end reps and just be totally blown away. But the reality is, like, if a quarterback is looking to a spot and you're not in it, you're not going to get the ball a lot. Like, you can't just do whatever you need to do to get open. Like, you need to be within the timing of the play. It's hard for outsiders like us who don't practice with them, who don't know like the route depths and stuff like that, what they want, especially in like Texas's offense, which that offense is like kind of a sloppy mess at times with what they're asking the receivers to do. So there's a lot of that we don't know. And I think when it looks good and it is on time and you are where you're supposed to, getting the ball, earning targets, that's a very, very telltale sign of that. And AD Mitchell never really did that at a high level in college.
Yeah, no, you're right. I remember we looked at the stats last year. It was like he did not come through well in the numbers, and
Yep.
like it was an anomaly. It was like trying to figure out the tape looks really nice, but why wasn't he getting the football? It's because Xavier Worthy's there, and they have good running backs and a really niche offense that just does all this weird stuff, or is it AD Mitchell related? And it's hard to parse.
It most definitely is. And I was just watching Isaiah Bond, and I was like, man, like I got to get away from this Texas offense. Like I can't do this anymore. Like it's even harder with that offense. Yeah.
Even with their O-line stuff, I'm like, I watch it. I'm just like, my head starts to hurt if I watch too much Sarkisian.
It's a mess.
But last question here. Who is a Bears draft pick that has had you the most excited in your lifetime as a Bears fan?
I loved Anthony Miller for so much of the same reasons. He was like my second favorite receiver in that class, I think behind Calvin Ridley. Like I liked him more than DJ Moore, and I bought his jersey shirt. Like I was so fired up, and like I still think to this very day he was a super talented guy that just never had his head on straight. And they reported that he was like late to meetings all the time and stuff like that. I mean, I still think he could be really talented. It never panned out. On the positive note of a guy I was fired up that they drafted, I'm trying to think of all the guys. I love Tevin Jenkins when they drafted Tevin Jenkins. I was like, this dude's a road grader. The Bears need more of this nasty. I liked him at tackle, and that was their plan originally. And I never loved trading up in the draft, but I was like, for a player like him, I could get behind this.
Yeah, no, I get that. That was a trading up for Tevin was one of the probably most like conflicting feelings I've had with a draft pick, where I was like, I love this player. I wanted to get him in the first round. Yeah. But like we have 2 draft picks left in the draft.
Right.
But it was, and I will always think that that Tevin could have probably played tackle had it not been for the back injuries.
For sure.
I think those really limited his mobility. And like after those happened, it was like, okay, guard does make more sense.
Definitely.
But Tom, I think that's all we've got for you. So make sure anyone listening, watching, go check out Tom on Twitter. Go give him a follow at TommyK_NFL draft.
That is me. Yes.
All right. Yeah. And make sure you check out the Bears Blog Boys podcast. But Tom, any final thoughts before we close this out?
No, man. I'm just excited to really get diving into the process. I mean, we're really churning out the reports and everything like that. So yeah, just keep a lookout.
All right. And we'll be back with another scout shortly. Thanks, guys. All right. And now we are going to talk with our final scout here, Nick DeMeo.
What's up,
Nick,
guys?
How are you doing?
Good. How you doing, Q?
I'm doing good. Nick was with us last year. And Nick, can you give everyone a little bit of detail about your background, where they can find you, find your work, all that good stuff?
Sure. So my background, avid Bears fan. I've known Q for a while, and he kind of wrote me in last year, which was awesome, to do some scouting. First year scouting, I guess, for the draft. I've always had an interest in it. I've always kind of kept tabs on it, but this is the first time I really find myself grinding film. You can find my work on Twitter. My is or I guess on X, sorry, at sniper_1154. You can read me at ontapsportsnet.com. I'm a contributing author there. Those are the 2 biggest places. I try to be as active as I can. Whether or not my opinions are good, I'll leave that up to the audience. But yeah, I'm looking forward to getting into this year's crop of prospects.
Yeah, I mean, hey, I think you always have good opinions and good discussion. So, I mean,
that's why I like you.
Going back to our days of posting all over Bears Reddit,
exactly.
There's always good conversation.
Exactly. Oh yeah. I'm still bopping around there, but yeah, the off season is always hope is on high. Everybody's on hopium right now. So
that's what draft season is, right? It's it's the time where hope is alive.
Exactly. Yeah. The Bears are the most optimistic the times that they're not playing football. So that's when the Bears fans are everybody's on, ready for the next season. So
I always like to say, a fan base is down bad when their bloggers and analysts are getting really good at draft stuff
Oh my gosh, yeah.
because that's a bad
Yeah.
sign for your
They've been,
team.
yeah, they've been like practicing since October. It's like
Like, like Dame Brugler's from like Cleveland. There's a few other like draft analysts who are like Browns fans, and it's
yeah,
just like you kind of understand why after the Bears stretch.
it's like February 1st, and it's like my mock draft 8.0. It's like, gosh, you've had a long time to be. So
Yeah, it's been
yeah.
stewing.
it
But
has.
but Nick, what's your favorite position to scout and why?
So I've been scouting extensively cornerback, safety, and linebacker since I've been doing the building the board series. My favorite is probably cornerback. For one, I think you get an idea or an understanding. You see a lot more one-on-one matchups. You see a lot of guys. You can see technique a little bit more on display. It's a little easier to digest, I think, when you're just watching a cornerback. I enjoy the nuance of the game, especially when you get, one of my favorite matchups last year was watching Terrion Arnold go up against the Texas receivers and Kool-Aid McKinstry going up against the Texas receivers, and how at the start of the season, the Texas receivers just dominated. And then you kind of saw them shore up a little bit their next bout. And you can kind of see, especially with Terrion Arnold, you saw the improvement and development from just 10 games or however many it was between games that they played each other. So I enjoy that aspect of it. I think the cornerbacks tend to be one of, if not the most athletic players on the field. They're having to run backwards and then turn their hips, right? So it gives you a really good understanding. It's a difficult position to scout, I think, but it's also, as far as barrier to entry, you don't need to know as much about maybe the scheme or the defensive alignment. If you're watching a true man-on-man matchup, you can really just sit there and watch, like, okay, this is what he's doing, and this is it's a user-friendly position to draft. And I was lucky enough to, I guess, pull that one last year, and it's kind of helped me as I've gone into safeties and linebackers. So I'll always have a soft spot for cornerbacks.
Yeah, it's kind of like there's an age-old adage that, like, if you can play man coverage, you can play in any defense, right? Like we can make that work.
Exactly.
And at the end of the day, some of the man coverage stuff, it's like, yeah, you can get really in the weeds with it and really technical with it, but also that I always feel like there is an aspect to it of like, well, did he cover him or did he not?
Yeah,
when he's in man
exactly.
coverage,
Exactly. Yeah, like Nick Saban's defense at Alabama and their coverage responsibilities are a little different than what Quinten Mitchell was running at Toledo. But it's like, you can still, when you water it all down and distill it, you're like, okay, this guy can cover and he's a freak on tape. So let's see what he can do against tougher competition. And at least you can kind of see a foundation develop a little clearer with cornerbacks, I think, than with some of the guys. For instance, with linebackers, when you see a coverage mishap between two inside linebackers, you're like, which guy messed it up? And you might have to go back and watch 3 or 4 times, be like, okay, I see what they were trying to do here. So, I guess I enjoy cornerbacks, but I really don't not enjoy any position. I really like grinding the tape and watching them all, because it's helping me learn and know a little bit more about the game with each new position I scout.
Yeah, the learning aspect of this project is always one that it's one that I enjoy the most. It's like I've done this, will be my 3rd year doing this, and like I feel like every year I've come out of it understanding certain things, positions just so much better, and that's helped really shape my understanding of the game.
Right.
But one area, and this isn't one of our listed questions, but one area I want to talk to you about as a guy who has watched a lot of safety.
Sure.
How do you evaluate college safety?
Oh my gosh. Well, last year I got to work at Robert Schmitz, and that was like, talk about having a guiding hand, because that guy is phenomenal at just kind of understanding defensive backfields and safety coverages. That was difficult because really you're trying to figure out, like, there were just guys that I was watching on tape and I was like, I just don't see it. Kalen Bullock is a guy that I watched and I was like, okay, I understand there's some knocks on him. He's got a wiry frame, and he was on a terrible USC defense, but he can cover sideline to sideline. And
Dude who doesn't seem like he's touching the grass when he's
yeah,
running.
exactly. And Cam Kitchens was a guy I was high on. I thought with how Miami used him and how they kind of played him all around their backfield. They had him lining up at safety. They had him lining up at I guess it'd be a big nickel or a Buffalo nickel, or I mean, they had him all over the place. And I just, with the versatility, and he ended up having a pretty decent year for the Rams. But it's a tough position to scout at the college level. You kind of have to, I'm trying to think of, there were some guys last year, and their names escape me.
So like, I know one that stands out to me. I remember distinctly because it's my alma mater, and I loved this player, but I couldn't tell you why when watching his All 22.
Yeah,
was Dadrian Taylor Demerson, because it felt like every single snap I watched, he was just dropping deep middle and cover 3, and nothing was going near him. And it was just like, how on earth do I evaluate this guy?
That's what, with the better safeties, it's like the offense makes it a point to not throw it to them. So, with Cam Kitchens, it was a little easier because they were playing single high so much at Miami, because I forget the name of his running mate, but he was basically a linebacker. Was it Evan Williams? Is that who?
It wasn't Evan Williams. He was Oregon, but I know I remember here James Williams.
Yeah, maybe James Williams, but he was like 6'5", like he was gigantic, and they just played him as a linebacker, and he was listed as a safety, and so it was a little easier to kind of watch. Okay, can Cam Kitchens drop as a single high safety? Can he cover sideline to sideline, and can he move his responsibility like that, like he's supposed to? With some of those players, though, it is a little trickier, and especially if it's a split safety and one of them is just so much more talented than the other one, you're not going to see much get thrown to the guy that's going to be drafted in the NFL versus the guy that's going to be selling insurance or whatever.
Yeah.
But, it was a tough position to scout, because it was it was one of those, I think, I can't speak for Robert, but I think we both had Tyler Nubin as our number 1 safety, and he was okay, but it was, I don't think Giants, and I don't think he made Giants fans forget about Xavier McKinney in his first season. So there's still some room to grow. So
now moving back to cornerbacks, you said that's your favorite position to scout. What is a non-negotiable trait you look for, or maybe it's the first thing you look for when you're watching the tape?
So when I'm first looking, I'm looking for tenacity, which is one of those, I guess, intangible terms, but I really like to see a cornerback that's not afraid of contact, that is not afraid to get their hands dirty at the line of scrimmage. Some of the cornerbacks I really liked last year that kind of flew. I really liked Drew Phillips coming out of Kentucky. I really liked Quinten. I really liked Nate Wiggins. I mean, all these guys are household names now, but maybe not Drew Phillips, but they were all drafted pretty highly. But I mean, if you watch their tape, these were guys. I mean, Nate Wiggins was going up against Johnny Wilson at FSU, and Johnny Wilson was like the Jolly Green Giant. I mean, he was like 6'7". I think he's on the Eagles now, but he was, and Wiggins,
he's their big slot, their power slot,
and you would watch Nate Wiggins, who was 6'2" and weighed 120 pounds, it looked like, and he was winning battles at the line of scrimmage. So I like to see a corner that can, not necessarily, when I say tenacity, I don't mean can they play press man well. I just mean someone who is going to fight for the ball, fight through contact,
competitive toughness.
Yeah, not let themselves get stacked on a route and fight, because it's easy. I was going to say fluid hips. I feel like that's kind of like I think, a cornerback needs to have fluid hips, but I think you can get away with it if you've got a guy who's going to, like I said, be tenacious, be able to, if they don't win off the break, they can at least catch up, fight through.
Like a Peanut Tillman might not have had the most fluid hips.
Exactly.
Or like Cooper DeJean last year. Exactly have fluid hips.
Yeah.
But he's smart. He's competitive. He's tenacious. There's different traits.
Jalen Johnson is a guy who I would say is another guy who you'll see him, I think the first game of the season against the Titans, he lost deep on Calvin Ridley, and you saw him fight back and almost get the interception, going beneath the throws. I mean, it's just, I think with tenacity, there's a certain level of instincts that's applied to it, and just kind of understanding like, okay, maybe they beat me on this, but I know how to get back into position and make a play either on the ball or on the receiver so they don't catch the ball. So
Yeah, I feel like for corner, you could almost call it like cockiness sometimes.
yeah,
Like,
exactly.
they're just like, oh, I'm gonna get you back. Like,
Exactly. Yeah.
All right, so moving on from that, and we're talking a little bit about some of the draft picks from last year. Who was one of your guys from last year?
So I was really high on Drew Phillips, cornerback out of Kentucky. I remember early on I scouted him. He was maybe like the third or fourth corner I scouted. And at the time, when we do this, there's not a lot of supplemental material out because we kind of get a jump on some of the other, I guess, other places that do draft scouting. And not that we share notes, but there's, when you go look up Drew Phillips, you kind of want to get an idea of, okay, who is he as a player? And everything I'd seen was suggesting he was like a 5th or 6th round pick. And I'm watching the tape and I'm like, there's no way this guy's going to go in the 5th or 6th round. He was shutting down Brock Bowers against UGA and a little slot nickel, well, not little, but a slot nickel going up against a guy who just set the receiving record for tight ends as a rookie. But I was really high on Drew Phillips, and I think if he wasn't the highest rated cornerback by PFF as a rookie, I know he was one of the highest rated, and he just had I think sometimes you get, I know Lance Zierlein has said, you look for traits, and that's very true. But I think sometimes people get so locked in on traits that they lose sight of football, just football players and guys that like are going to play football. And I watched Drew Phillips and I was like, this guy's just a football player. He's never going to be Sauce Gardner. He's not going to be, I don't think, a number one lockdown corner, but he will probably be in the NFL for like a decade as a very good slot corner who can take away, play the run. He plays the run well and can line up against, either a slot wide receiver or tight end, an athletic tight end. And so that was one he was one of my guys from last year. And I've been paying attention to how he's been doing because it was one of the, last year was the first time really scouting. So I was like watching him, and you have to learn to kind of just trust your eyes. And that was the first one I was like, I'm seeing something that these other places are not seeing, and I don't know if maybe I just haven't done this long enough, and it'll eventually show up. And then it's like, okay, well, maybe I'm not wrong here. Maybe I'm not taking crazy pills, and he's just going to be a good player. So
yeah, there's definitely that aspect of it. Like, I feel like I've had a handful of those in the last few years where it's like my eyes, like, yeah, all right.
Yeah.
Each year you start to trust your eyes more and more
Right.
with what you're seeing when you're getting that positive verification like that. But like, I like what you said with Drew Phillips. Like, there's some guys who are just football players.
Yeah.
And you can see that through the tape. You can see the football character through the tape. You can see the love of the game through the tape sometimes. And I've almost hit a point with some of those guys where it's like, if the requisite traits are like enough, and I can see that, I have a hard time putting anything below below like a 3rd round grade. It's like, can I really say this guy who I think is going to play a long time in this league might never be a star?
Right.
Is going to have some years as a starter, going to be a real contributor on special teams. Is he really a 5th round pick?
Yeah. And the Rams have made such a great, like, they've built their roster so well, because I feel like if you look at their draft classes, it's almost like that 3rd, 4th, and 5th round, they're just looking for football players.
Mm-hmm.
And like, those are like the high floor, maybe not the highest ceiling. I mean, guy like a Kobe Turner, who is turning into one of the best defensive tackles in the league. But, when they drafted him, he had a pretty high floor, and it was, this guy has some small knocks, but there's no doubt he loves football. Same with Puka Nacua. It's like, you go look at Puka Nacua's scouting report, and it's like, yeah, the guy's not the greatest athlete, but he can fight to get open. And, it's, I feel like you get burned a lot less if you know, in first round, even in the second round, you want to get a guy with high traits that, you know, if they flame out, it's like, well, yeah, but we're drafting for the superstar in those rounds. We're not looking for the, you know, second tight end or whatever, whatever it may be. But, and then, you know, in the 6th or 7th round, take whatever lottery picks you want, you know, grab whatever guy, you know, grab whatever freak comes, you know, some 6'9", you know, running back or something. You want to see what he can do. But, yeah, I
6'9" running back.
Yeah,
That's a vision right there.
yeah, I'm thinking of, didn't the Bears? I don't think they drafted him, but like, wasn't that what? Didn't they? OC Umenyiora has that program over in like, I forget, over in Africa somewhere where he's like developing players in Africa.
Oh, I didn't know about that.
They're all like athletic freaks, but they've never played football before. It was the guy that, another example is the guy the Bears drafted. Was it Iselin? Dieter Iselin, the like former.
Yeah.
It's like, you want to take a guy like that who's played rugby for his entire, you know, and wrestles alligators or something. Yeah, go ahead and see if he can be a lineman.
Jordan Mailata was a 7th round pick who barely played football ever in his life.
So yeah. But yeah, I love when I see teams get those guys in the 3rd or 4th or 5th round who are, you know, one guy was just praying the Bears would get his Cooper Beebe, the center that Dallas took. And I think he went 2 or 3 picks before the Bears took Kieran Amagaji. And I would love to have seen if he was available, if they would have taken him, because that was another guy that I was like, okay, you're probably not getting the next Zach Martin, but this guy could be your center for 5 or 6 years, maybe even longer. And, you know, is out there snapping the footballs to his mom or whatever it was when he got drafted, because he never played center. So, but yeah, I really like Drew Phillips. And like I said, I was really high on Nate Wiggins. I think I had him my cornerback 1, and he had a pretty good year for the Ravens. I wouldn't say it was a bad. I haven't dug a lot into Ravens tape. I know they started the year really bad against the pass, and then I think they did some tweaking with Kyle Hamilton, and that shored things up in their secondary. But yeah, those were 2 guys I was very high on. Phillips for the football acumen, and then Wiggins had just traits that went off the page. So
yeah, I'm pretty sure Wiggins finished the year off pretty strong. Because I mean, he was starting down the stretch there.
Yeah.
I mean, it was him across from the corner who's been there for forever.
Yeah, Humphreys.
Humphrey.
I think. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Drew Phillips was the 5th highest graded corner in the class before so the 3rd highest after you filter for snap counts.
Right.
And let's see, where's Nate Wiggins? Wiggins was the 6th highest. Wiggins has 72.6 PFF grades. So
That's
he was
good.
a solid starter.
Yeah. It was a good draft for cornerbacks. Like, I remember talking about that last year with, I don't know if there's a lot of, you know, it's not like a Sauce Gardner, Derek Stingley class where you had just 2 guys that were like top 5 picks locked. But I was like, you're going to get a lot of talent and a lot of good play for a long time with deep into this draft. So,
yeah. Now, last question we got here. Who is a Bears draft pick that has had you the most excited for a Bears draft pick?
Oh, just ever? Or
ever.
Oh man, who was I super excited for? I know I was really let's see. I was really excited when they drafted Rex Grossman.
Me too, man.
I was like,
they're so smart.
Oh,
they're so much smarter than everybody else.
So, funny story about that is like, I was really high on Dwayne Robertson. He was like this defensive tackle out of Miami, and he was okay, but the Bears traded with the Jets, and then they drafted Michael Haynes and Rex Grossman. And anyway, fast forward like, I don't know, 15, 20 years, and I make custom furniture and on the side, and I sell it across the country. And when I sell it, I have to book a courier, because you can't just ship that stuff with like UPS. You have to get someone. And anyway, I book a courier. The guy shows up. He was super late, terrible communication, and pulls up, and he's got this red like Hummer, and he's got this souped up trailer. I mean, the whole outfit had to have been like $200,000. I swear to God, it's Dwayne Robertson. He comes pulling up. dude. And like, it's one of those things where like he could tell he was surprised I knew who he was because I was like, "Are you Dwayne Robertson?" Because his name pops up like Dwayne Robertson, and I'm like, "This can't be like it's like a
The
random
Dwayne Roberts.
top 5 pick from 2003." And he's like, "Yeah, I'm Dwayne Robertson." And I had kind of been getting like persnickety with the dude because he was like constantly like, "I'm in trap." You know, I think he delayed things like 2 or 3 times. And I was like, dude, come on, you gotta be. And he pulled up, and I swear, if he could have like twisted my head off like a bottle cap. Like the dude, it was a big like 10-foot table, and he had come and he just lifted it with one arm to see how heavy it was. And I was like, this is a full circle moment because I was like, dude, I wanted the Bears to get you. And then they traded and they drafted Rex Grossman and Michael Haynes, and it's like all 3 of you guys kind of had underwhelming careers, but like
You didn't say that to him.
no, I didn't. I was like, yeah, I was like, boy, we dodged a bullet, right? Like, but no, he was a real chill guy. But it was just such a weird, like, he looked at me when I was like, "Are you Dwayne Robertson, who was drafted 4th overall by the Jets in 2000?" Like, and he's just looking at me, and I'm like, he probably was like, who remembers that? But I was like, excited for Rex. I mean, more recently. I was really, I mean, Caleb and Rome were probably the most excited. I was super excited for Justin Fields because I live 2 or 3 miles from where he played high school football. So he's been a like a folk hero around here forever. Him and Trevor Lawrence. Trevor Lawrence went to school like 20 miles from us, so they were constantly back and forth. So I guess the common denominator is they were all quarterbacks who kind of flamed out for the Bears between. So hopefully Caleb can break that that curse, so to say. But yeah, I mean, I can't remember. Like Justin Fields was probably the one I remember just being like, "Oh, that's awesome." And Tevin, because I remember thinking the Bears would only. I remember the talk was the Bears were going to take Tevin Jenkins at their original pick. And then they traded up for Fields, and they were still able to trade back and get Tevin Jenkins. But yeah, it's been not a lot of draft picks to get super excited for. Just today, I was looking through the Bears draft classes from like 2007 to 2017. It's like 10 years. I think they had like one All-Pro, like one player they've drafted who made one All-Pro. So it's been a rough stretch. Like
It has. Yeah, I mean 2007 you had like the Dan Bazoween and
Oh,
Michael Ogwo
dude.
year. Like
Yeah.
it was a great time.
Yeah, there were I mean, the guy Jerron Gilbert jumping out of a pool. I mean, there were some real lemons in those draft classes. So but yeah, I would say Fields, Grossman, and then Caleb Williams. I'm super I think Caleb Williams will actually be good. So fingers crossed.
Yeah. Now I'm going to answer this question because I haven't answered it yet. But
Yeah. Well,
so I'm just going to take a second and answer it here. And I'm looking through these picks, like really trying to think through it. It's like, man, it's Justin Fields, but
yeah.
like, and that's been a consistent answer across all the
Oh,
the
has it
scouts.
really?
Pretty
Yeah.
much. It's like Caleb, but Justin Fields was different, and Justin Fields was different. Like that
Yeah.
draft pick felt so different.
It was like, yeah, because it was I don't know, it was just everything kind of fell into place because you're hearing, for so long he was the 1B, Trevor Lawrence is 1A, and then you've got guys like Nate Tice gassing him up and saying he's this big game hunter, but he's got he can be legit. And it was just one of those things like, okay, this is a legit prospect that the Bears have drafted at the quarterback spot that like he could be really good. Was great in college. So
yeah,
it was a different feeling. And then, in typical Bears fashion, it comes crashing down. Reality hits pretty hard.
Now, just to be a little different, I mean, part of me wants to go Darnell Wright, but another part of me says my first tweet that day on draft day was Jalen Carter no matter what. So
Dude.
I'm not sure I can say that.
Yeah.
I loved the Darnell pick, but like I really wanted Jalen Carter.
I was gonna say, like, that's the thing, like with Jalen Carter, it's like it doesn't discredit Darnell Wright, but it's like, dude, Jalen Carter, everyone was like, he should have that was like Laramie Tunsil all over again. That was like
Mhm.
when Laramie Tunsil, they, somebody released that bong video of him that looked,
Yeah.
looked like something like, but and he started to fall. Cause I mean, leading up to that, he was like a top 3 pick.
Mhm.
And the more he fell, I'm like, and then the Bears traded up, and I was like, oh, they're gonna get him. And it was for Leonard Floyd, who has had a good career, but it's like, I don't even remember who the Bears left tackle at that. That's 2016. So that was what?
Charles
Leno, I
It had to
guess.
be Leno.
Yeah, and it's like, you can do better than him. He's like Braxton Jones. It's like he's a decent left tackle, but if
Mhm.
Laramie Jones falls into or Laramie Tunsil rather falls into your
Yeah.
lap, like, yeah, Wright was another one I was like excited for, but at the same time I was like, that little voice in the back of your head, like, is Jalen Carter gonna make us regret
Yeah.
this? Like,
So then I end up like Gabe Karimi was up there for me. That one did not work out.
yeah.
And then Dusty Dvorak was one that I
Oh
loved. I
yeah.
loved that one. And DJ Moore out of
The
Vanderbilt.
quarterback. Yeah.
Yeah. I was like, so Grant with Dvorak and DJ Moore, I didn't know anything about them. I was like
Right.
15 years old, 16 years old.
Yeah.
But like I went as soon as they were drafted, I went to my computer, went to Lance Zierlein Scouting Report, and was like, oh yeah, this
Yeah.
guy's gonna be this guy. Like
Well,
A plus.
Yeah, because I was like, oh, Dusty Dvorak, he played with Tommy Harris. So like they're gonna pair them up and it's gonna be just
He like broke, there was something on his Oklahoma Sooners like team page that
Yeah.
said that he like broke their team powerlifting records. And I was
Yeah.
like a 16-year-old in high school football. I was like, yeah, I'm sold.
Yeah, that's like
Like-
what did Stephen Paya, did he do something like that too? I remember I thought there was some
So he might still hold the bench press record at the
Yeah,
combine.
like-
If he doesn't hold it still, he's like top 5 still.
Yeah, and I remember he was one I was like, oh sweet. You hear those like little nuggets that just stick in the
Yeah.
back of your head, and then they draft the guy, and I'm like, oh nice, they got the guy that like broke the bench press record. So
Yeah,
was, like,
cool.
when they drafted Pat O'Donnell, and it was like, is it great? The only thing they talk about this guy is that he's like super strong, like he broke the bench press record for a punter. I'm like, can he kick the ball at all?
Yeah.
Or like this is such. I feel like if Caleb Williams could out punt all the punters, and it's like, but he's a quarterback, so like I don't care. Like, so yeah, you start looking through the Bears draft picks, and it's a sobering reminder of like some of those Phil Emery drafts were just like when he was taking guys like Ego Ferguson and like Will
Shane
Sutton,
McClellan.
Brock Vereen, guys that
Yeah.
like it was just like you look at it and I'm like, oh man, this is like rough. So they haven't been that bad lately. I feel like maybe that's just hopeful thinking, but
Yeah. They've been fine. I mean, I generally think Ryan Poles has been pretty much average as a
Yeah.
drafter, which is fine. Average is average. Like you'll take it.
yeah.
But why don't we wrap this thing up, Nick? Do you have any final thoughts before we close this out about the upcoming process, about the draft, anything?
No, I think I'm like I said, I'm going through linebackers. I know we'll be meeting up here in a couple weeks, running through the linebackers of the 2025 class. I'm seen some good tape, seen some okay tape, seen some not so great tape, but it's a lot of fun. I'm looking forward to talking about those guys. And then just kind of check us out. Building the board is the hashtag I know we use for on Twitter. So I know I can't speak for myself, but the guys, I know they're releasing content. So, there's content being released constantly. So it's a good, and some of the videos, that Tommy puts together and they're great. So you go check them out. You can check me out. I'm releasing linebacker videos as I make them. So kind of give you a good primer heading into draft season.
Yeah, make sure to check them out. Hashtag building the board. And over at ontapsportsnet.com, we're writing scouting reports to go with each one of our videos with a little more detail, a little more depth about the guy's background, their strengths, their weaknesses. So make sure to check them out. And thank you guys so much for listening, watching, and we'll see you guys in the next episode.